1744. A young empress rallies Europe to crush Prussia. A defiant king strikes first. This is the Second Silesian War, Austria's bitter campaign to undo Frederick the Great's theft of Silesia during the War of the Austrian Succession. But when the smoke cleared at Hohenfriedberg, Maria Theresa learned a brutal lesson about Prussian military might, one that would fuel the coming 7 Years' War. The gathering storm, shadows before the Second Silesian War. The ink had barely dried on the treaty that ended the First Silesian War when darker winds began to blow across Europe. In the courts of Vienna and Berlin, beneath the veneer of diplomacy, old wounds festered and ambitions rekindled. Maria Theresa, her pride still smarting from the loss of Silesia, vowed in silence to one day reclaim what had been torn from her grasp. Frederick of Prussia, ever the strategist, watched warily as Austria bound itself to Britain, Sardinia, and perhaps even Russia, each ally a thread in a tightening noose. Though Britain had once mediated peace, its new alliance under the Treaty of Worms made no promises to shield Prussia. Russia loomed too, its stance shifting under a new pro-Austrian chancellor. Frederick knew what few yet dared say aloud. The peace was an illusion, a pause in a longer storm. To strike first would be to survive. With diplomatic cunning and quiet urgency, he stitched together the League of Frankfurt, rallying Bavaria, Sweden, and others under the banner of the beleaguered Emperor Charles VII. A secret pact with France followed, setting the stage for a two-pronged war that would pull Austria apart at the seams. In August 1744, Frederick declared war, not just to defend an emperor, but to secure his kingdom's fragile gains and prevent his enemies from closing in. Thus, the Second Silesian War began, not as a war of conquest but of preemptive survival, ambition cloaked in necessity, vengeance masked by strategy. Europe would bleed once more. The Prague Gambit, triumph and retreat in Bohemia. The summer of 1744 burned with ambition as Frederick led 70,000 Prussian soldiers into Bohemia, his bold stroke meant to fracture Austrian resolve and reignite Prussian dominance. With surgical precision, his forces pierced the kingdom in 3 coordinated columns, through the steep passes of the giant mountains, across the Elbe from Dresden, and through Lusatia under imperial sanction. In early September, the 3 arms of the Prussian machine clenched around Prague, unleashing a rain of cannon fire that forced the historic city to its knees by the 16th. Yet even as Frederick basked in the glory of a swift conquest, the tides began to turn. France, his crucial ally, faltered, paralyzed by King Louis XV's illness, and failed to disrupt Austria's regrouping. The seasoned Prince Charles of Lorraine seized the opportunity, sweeping his army back across Europe with renewed purpose, abandoning Alsace and Bavaria but regaining the heart of Bohemia. Meanwhile, Saxony, once a neutral bystander, was drawn into the storm on Austria's side. Frederick's campaign began to unravel. Every attempt to draw the Austrians into open battle was denied, as General von Traun outmaneuvered the Prussians and choked their supply lines. Hunger and frustration stalked Frederick's army, and by November hope had withered. Surrounded and outmaneuvered, the proud conquerors abandoned Prague and trudged back across the Elbe, defeated not by battle but by brilliant evasion. Frederick's dreams of a swift second victory collapsed into a grim winter of defense in Silesia, as the specter of Austrian revenge loomed ever larger. The fall of Bavaria, a shattered alliance and the turning tide. In the icy dawn of 1745, the fragile scaffolding of Frederick's alliance began to crack. Austria, relentless and resolute, sealed a powerful pact in the Treaty of Warsaw, forging a new quadruple alliance with Britain, Saxony, and the Dutch Republic, each united by gold and vengeance, determined to restore the Habsburg realm. Behind the facade of defense, a darker pact was inked in Leipzig, a secret plan between Austria and Saxony to carve Prussia apart. While the storm gathered, a flicker of hope lit Munich. Emperor Charles VII returned to his capital, reclaiming it as Prussian pressure pulled Austria's gaze eastward, but fate was cruel. Just days after reclaiming his throne, the emperor fell dead, and with him died the purpose behind Frederick's support of the Bavarian cause. Austria struck back with fury. In April, its armies stormed through the weakened Bavarian defenses and shattered the Franco-Bavarian forces at Pfaffenhofen. The young Maximilian III Joseph, heir to a crumbling legacy, bent beneath the weight of defeat. On April 22 he made peace, abandoning dreams of imperial conquest and pledging fealty to Maria Theresa's chosen, Francis Stephen. Bavaria was lost, its ambitions extinguished. With the southern front silenced, Austria turned its full wrath toward Prussia. The war's tempo quickened and Frederick, once the orchestrator of destiny, found himself bracing against a rising tide of enemies. A battle for survival, Hohenfriedberg and Soor, the turning of the tide. In the heat of mid-1745, with peace secured with Bavaria, Austria unleashed its fury upon Silesia. Charles of Lorraine's mighty army surged into Moravia, while Saxon forces gathered near Leipzig, preparing for the inevitable clash. But Frederick, ever the tactician, withdrew from the southern mountains and dug in around the town of Frankenstein, awaiting the coming storm. In late May, as the Austrian-Saxon force advanced, Frederick struck with the precision of a thunderbolt. On June 4, the Battle of Hohenfriedberg erupted, and the Prussian army, like an unyielding tempest, shattered the Austrian forces, sending them fleeing in disarray. For a moment, Silesia was secured, but Frederick's victory came at a cost. His forces, worn and hungry, followed their retreating enemies into Bohemia, only to face a long, grueling standoff by the Elbe. As the months dragged on, diplomacy opened a rare window of hope. The Convention of Hanover between Britain and Prussia promised peace, preserving Prussia's grip on Silesia. But the war's heart still beat in the chambers of power. Maria Theresa, undeterred, saw her husband crowned Emperor Francis I in September, a triumph amid the chaos. Yet victory was not assured, for on September 29, Prince Charles of Lorraine launched a savage surprise attack on Frederick's camp at Soor. Despite the odds, the Prussians held their ground, securing another hard-won victory. But the war dragged on, supplies dwindled, and the Prussians were forced to retreat once more into Upper Silesia, their resolve tested but not broken. The battle for Silesia was far from over, and the fate of Europe still hung in the balance. The last stand, Hennersdorf and Kesselsdorf, victory in the face of defeat. As the war stretched into late 1745, the Prussian and British hope for a peaceful resolution faded. Despite the defeats at Hohenfriedberg and Soor, Maria Theresa remained unyielding, determined to fight on. In late August, Austria and Saxony forged a new aggressive alliance, and by November, they launched a fresh offensive aimed at seizing Prussian territory and ending the war. The combined forces of Prince Charles's Austrians and Frederick Augustus II's Saxons began marching toward Brandenburg, intending to seize Berlin and crush the Prussian resistance once and for all. But Frederick, ever the master of strategy, acted swiftly. On November 23, he struck at Prince Charles's camp near Katholisch-Hennersdorf with a surprise attack, utterly destroying the Saxon portion of the Allied force and scattering the Austrians in confusion. The victory sent Charles and his remnants retreating into Saxony, leaving Lusatia firmly under Prussian control. Meanwhile, Leopold I's forces pushed into Saxony, capturing Leipzig and advancing toward Dresden. On December 15, they met the entrenched Saxons at Kesselsdorf. The Battle of Kesselsdorf was a brutal, decisive confrontation, and Leopold's Prussians shattered the Saxon army, opening the path to Dresden. By December 18, the Prussians had secured the city, forcing Charles and the Saxons to retreat into Bohemia. As the dust settled, Frederick once again sought peace, offering a glimmer of hope for an end to the bloodshed, though the future remained uncertain, and the fate of Silesia still hung in the balance. The Treaty of Dresden, the price of peace and the fate of Silesia. After years of brutal conflict, the Treaty of Dresden, signed on December 25, 1745, finally brought an uneasy peace between Prussia, Austria, and Saxony. The war had ravaged Europe, but in the snow-covered streets of Dresden, representatives from Austria, Saxony, and Britain met with Prussian delegates to negotiate the terms of a new reality. Maria Theresa, having exhausted her resources and weary from years of war, grudgingly acknowledged Prussia's control over Silesia and Glatz, territories that had been the heart of the struggle. In return, Frederick the Great recognized Francis I as Holy Roman Emperor, accepting the pragmatic sanction that had once been so fiercely contested. For Saxony's role in the war, they were forced to pay a staggering sum of 1 million Reichsdollars to Prussia, a price that underscored the cost of their defeat. The treaty marked a return to the status quo ante bellum, effectively solidifying Prussia's territorial gains and ending the Second Silesian War, though the peace was fragile and the memory of battle lingered. It was a moment of triumph for Frederick, but a bitter one for Maria Theresa, as she was forced to accept the reality that the crown jewel of her inheritance, Silesia, was now irrevocably lost. The aftermath of the Second Silesian War, a Pyrrhic victory for Prussia. The conclusion of the Second Silesian War, sealed by the Treaty of Dresden, was seen by many as a victory for Prussia, cementing Frederick the Great's control over the contested territories of Silesia and Glatz. Prussia's successful intervention in Bohemia had also significantly disrupted Austria's war efforts against France, giving Frederick a strategic edge. Yet this victory came at a diplomatic cost. By signing a separate peace, once again while the larger war of the Austrian Succession raged on, Frederick damaged his reputation, earning a reputation for unreliability and double-dealing on the international stage. The treaty further soured relations between Austria, Saxony, and Prussia, planting the seeds of resentment that would eventually blossom into the Third Silesian War just a few years later. Though Prussia stood triumphant on the battlefield, the treaty sowed the seeds for future conflict, and the enmity it fostered would shape the course of European diplomacy for decades. The Second Silesian War proved Prussia could win battles, but not peace. The Treaty of Dresden bought just 11 years before erupting into the 7 Years' War. Was Frederick's victory Pyrrhic? How did Austria's humiliation reshape European alliances? The answers lie in our 7 Years' War documentary. Click to continue the story. And don't forget to debate below. Could Austria have won with different commanders?